There's a historical relationship between mass surveillance on a population and the crushing of dissent of that population. Can you explain that?
Well, that goes back to Caesar Augustus, I would say. Anybody that opposed him, you needed to know about it, first of all, and once that happened, they would disappear. Well, the same was true in the Soviet Union or East Germany with the Stasi. If you said anything out of line, you ended up in jail. Or in a sanitarium or something, or in a gulag somewhere. That same was true of the Nazis and the Gestapo and SS. They would do the same to people. Now, this is historically true. This is the way totalitarian states operates, and this is gathering knowledge about people and the entire population is a totalitarian procedure. That was the first thing that hit me right away. This was obvious, the route we were taking. And so that's why I've been opposing it since they started it in 2001.
Terrorism is the public justification for these programs because it's the easiest to convince people not to oppose it. But these programs were never about terrorism. They're about diplomatic manipulation, they're about economic espionage, and more broadly, social control. These are stories that indicate, for example, the British intelligence agency that's a part of this community had been found to be surveilling human rights groups. And this was not known. The public wasn't allowed to know about this. It couldn't be challenged in court until journalists revealed what was going on. But these capabilities that were, again, intended for use against terrorists were being used against groups, human rights organizations, such as Amnesty International. We saw that they were capturing the emails of journalists and international media, and this included not just like small groups. You would think journalists maybe in Pakistan that could be communicating with Al-Qaeda, but actually the BBC, the New York Times, the Guardian, and others. And in fact, in some of these stories, including in Canadian documents, I believe this is a story by the CBC, that the GCHQ, again, the British intelligence service that's a part of this Five Eyes spying alliance, that's the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, had classified investigative journalists as a threat who rank somewhere between terrorists and hackers, right? So they're not as bad as terrorists, but they're actually worse than hackers. And so this ultimately raises the question, and I would argue answers the question of, well, why are they creating these systems that intercept communications about everyone, despite the fact that they're not effective against terrorists? Well, the answer is, when you create a haystack of human lives, a bucket that collects all of the records of all of your private activities, it's about power. When you collect everything about everyone, you may not understand anything in aggregate. You may not be able to prevent any attacks. But once someone comes to your attention, you know absolutely everything about them, and they no longer have any power at all to affect change against you.
I used to fly as a cryptolinguist on RC-135 reconnaissance aircraft in the greater European theater during the latter years of the Cold War. My primary target of interest was East Germany. The Stasi became monstrously efficient, using surveillance to enable their pathological need to know everything, their very operating motto. However, I never imagined that the U.S. would use the Stasi playbook as a template for its own state-sponsored surveillance regime and turning not only its own citizens into virtual persons of interest, but also millions of citizens in the rest of the world.
If you read about the Department of Homeland Security, you will find something shocking. They went to experts to help them design the operations of Department of Homeland Security, and these experts, some of them, one at least was from the KGB, and another one was from the old East German secret police.
The Stasi.
Yes, the Stasi. And that is very important because there was something that the Stasi did to their own people, their own dissidents, in the 1980s. It was psychological warfare, and the German word for it is Zersetzung. And it's also called zersetzen, which is the verb. But zersetzung means decomposition. And what does it mean? It means that you take every aspect of the targeted person's life, and in their respect it was a dissident, You take every part of that person's life and you destroy it. You destroy their job, their ability to make money. You destroy their relationships. You destroy their health. You destroy their mental health. You destroy their reputation. And what the goal was to force this dissident into a position of either dying and starving on the street with nobody helping him or her, or committing suicide.
My father-in-law, Andy McKevitt, was born in Ireland and grew up along the border in between around a town called Newry. Andy died a couple of years ago. He was 99. He was born in 1911. So he was 10 years old during the Irish Civil War. And he remembered it very clearly. When I told him about the Phoenix program, he said to me, well, that's exactly what the Brits did to us in Ireland. And they had a barracks up on the hill. And at night, the soldiers would dress up like Irishmen. And they would come out of the barracks and they would kill our people. Not just the guys in the IRA, but they knew the family members of the guys in the IRA. And the soldiers would come out of the barracks at night and they would kill their wives and their children. They'd put them in a barn and they'd burn the whole barn down. Well, that is the Phoenix program, okay? It's terrorism directed against members of the civilian population in order to suppress the armed insurgency. But if you look back, you'll see that the Romans did it too. It's always been done. It's not something that people in power are unaware of. What the CIA does in the Phoenix program is to turn this into a highly refined bureaucratic system and to make it super technological and to refine it to such a degree that it becomes transferable all around the world. I mean, they bureaucratize this thing. And it goes, anything that can't be assimilated into the quote American way, into a consumer society, into our belief system, anything that can't be assimilated, well, they become subject to this new highly refined bureaucratic Phoenix system, which is how it becomes systematized and applied to Homeland Security. And how it becomes the template for the Department of Homeland Security and its fusion centers, which are now in every state across the country. And it becomes the template for the FBI's anti-terrorism task forces. What it does is whereas in Ireland, along the border, it was just a group of soldiers dressed like Irishmen and came out at night. Now it's systematized. Now it coordinates the guys in the barracks with the special branch, with the Navy, with the local police forces, with 25, 30, 40, 50 different organizations, with civic institutions. And all of these different organizations now are feeding information into a computer. And there's a guy in every Phoenix Center who gets all this intelligence about dissidents, civilians, and now they know everything about everybody, and they can pick you out, and they can go after you in ways that don't include now just putting everybody in a barn and burning the barn down. Now they can ruin your reputation. Now they can suppress you by putting your name in the newspaper as so and so was investigated for domestic terrorism, or so and so is part of environmental group that's planning on attacking some corporation for fracking. You know, it's just become a highly refined bureaucratic process that coordinates every government agency and almost every civic institution that is interested in expelling anybody from the system who can't be assimilated because they're a dissenter.
Mm-hmm.
It's got cutting edge technology. It has graduates of Yale who got graduated cum laude in organizational behavior. They study psychologically how people behave, and they incorporate that into their theories and their practices of how to control people. They control the media. The media is part of this. It's the indispensable part of it. They don't tell you that all this is going on, but it is. And it's been evolving and it's been developing. And that's why in this new book, The CIA is Organized Crime, I try to discuss it philosophically as well as with case studies to show that it's now become integrated into the very nature of what American society is and where it's going. And if you chart the historical arc in all these different facets that contribute to what this Phoenix, modern manifestation of program of the Phoenix program is, you can see exactly where it's going. You can see exactly where it's heading because you've seen where it's been and you see how it's evolved. But people can't do that because it's illegal to talk about the CIA. You never hear anybody talk about the CIA because the legislative branches of the government are part of it too. And starting in 1982, they created this. They passed legislation called the Agent Identity Act that makes it illegal for the press to name a CIA officer or to discuss CIA operations and methods. If, like John Kiriakou, you start talking about it, they put you in jail. So the security services have not only just developed this method, this Phoenix method, at the same time, the legislative lawmaking branches of the government made it illegal to talk about it or to reveal these protected people that are running this whole operation.
The Homeland Security Network is something of an obscene joke. You're being played for fools. Basically, there are thousands upon thousands of people on the terrorist watch list who are only there to bloat the list and to make you think that you're in danger. And under Bush, the FBI went to every single state it could and started something with their law enforcement agencies, a vigilante civilian group. They're supposed to be hyper-patriots. Well, they're not hyper-patriots. They're being played for fools. They're being paid to stalk and harass people they are told are threats or terrorists. And in the vast majority of cases, these people are innocent, randomly chosen people to be thrown on the terrorist watch list. And very often they're whistleblowers or someone powerful has a personal vendetta against. And so these IMPRISONMENT and other types of, excuse me for saying this, like the Soviets used to call the peasants, useful idiots, are helping destroy the lives of patriots and some of the nicest people and best people that we have.
This whole national organization, you're calling it IMPRISONMENT. It's a bogus patriot militia that goes far beyond simple surveilling of people. It harms them. It breaks into their homes. And Karen Stewart is a victim. We'll call this, that's what's called gang stalking, okay? A gang of people, maybe 15 or 20 in her immediate community, in her town, will watch her or others, and she has never been formally charged with anything in a court of law about this. Many aren't. They're just doing what they think is the right thing to do, truly the right thing to do for the country.
I was sitting at my computer, typing away one day, when I heard a knock at the door, and I saw two figures through the glass. And I thought they were Jehovah's Witnesses, so I got up to open the door. And to my great surprise, they weren't Jehovah's Witnesses at all. They identified themselves as CSIS agents, agents of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service.
Ken had written an op-ed piece in the Hamilton Spectator on the need for Canada to show a more peaceful approach in Iran. CSIS had to check him out.
I told them that everything I do is very public, letters to the editor, interviews on TV, public meetings in Hamilton, and I didn't feel the need to speak to them in private about it. So I asked them for their card. I took the card and I said, well, I had to get back to work. Have a nice day. I closed the door.
Not all police agents come clean as to where they're from. Some arrive and pretend to be our friends. They talk like us, look like us, even pretend to be sympathetic to our cause. But they are not our friends, and they are not sympathetic to our cause. They are a special branch of secret police hired by our government to infiltrate us and gather intelligence.
Security and police organizations in Canada do infiltrate activist groups. They do embed operatives for sometimes several months. And one example was in Ottawa in the lead up to the G8, G20, where the ISU JIG had an operative embedded in the Ottawa activist community for 6 to 7 months, going to workshops, going to events, even living with activists for a couple months, producing intelligence, feeding it into the intelligence chain, and then eventually departing. I believe the operative's name was Francois.
Interestingly, when I got back at my desk, 2 minutes later, I received a call from an imam in Toronto. At the end of the conversation, I said to him, you know what, I had this most unnerving experience just before you called, and I was visited by 2 CSIS agents at my door. And he said, are these CSIS agents da-da-da-da-da-da? And he went on to describe them in detail, their appearance. And I was astounded, and I said, how did you know this? And he said, because they visited me too, and a lot of members of our community. And he added that no matter what the explicit message is that these CSIS agents deliver to you or to anyone else, the underlying message is always the same. We know what you're doing, and we're watching you. In other words, intimidation.
If you publicly disagree with any plan Stephen Harper has for this country, you're considered a multi-issue extremist. Protesting the oil sands? Guess what? Now you're a multi-issue extremist. Protesting the government's lax environmental laws? Now you're a multi-issue extremist. Are you a First Nations activist? An anti-war activist? How about just someone who protests violence? You're considered a multi-issue extremist, and now the government has to keep a close eye on you, whether officially or in secret.
At one point, the Vancouver police were feeding information into the intelligence chain, and persons who, this is their language, had mental disturbances or who were mentally disturbed were also being referred to as multi-issue extremists. So what's interesting about it is that it is so elastic. It can be used to refer to almost any form of dissent or activity that police and security agents refer to as suspicious or cause for concern.
Counterintelligence Program was a series of secret FBI initiatives targeting activists, political, and minority groups. The American Indian Movement, the Black Panthers, Martin Luther King, women's and civil rights groups, Vietnam War protesters, and anyone who got the government seeing red. Tactics used included infiltration and surveying and discrediting leaders and causes in order to undermine entire movements and organizations. And it was officially disbanded in 1971. Though if you ask many activist groups and political dissidents, it still exists, just in another form.
Many of you are engaged in organizing, right? Many of you are activists, and in many cases you go beyond simply personal activism to some form of organized activism. So whichever of those you're engaged in, you have to be concerned about COINTELPRO stalking. Okay? Now this is an intimidating word. COINTELPRO, it wants to reach out to you, to harm you, reach out against you, and it also wants to destroy attempts at organization. And the question of organization is always at the center of the worries of the ruling elite, because if you want to do anything to counter the power of the ruling elite, which is certainly overweening, you need organization.
People forget that the first operation that the CIA did was to rig the Italian elections of 1948. The job was make sure that no communists gain a dominant position in the Italian parliament, because otherwise we can't insert Italy in 49 into NATO. So you had the vote first, and then the vote had to be rigged, had to be manipulated. It worked, actually worked. And in 49, Italy was inserted into NATO, but CIA and MI6 made sure that through this network of stay-behind soldiers, they always had sort of a secret control of all NATO countries.
And it was this sort of anti-communist impetus that was a large force behind the kind of morphing of this organisation into something much more sinister in nature, with substantial links to terrorism in some cases. So I wonder if you could tell us what happened there, why that shift took place, what that shift was.
Yes, that is the very, very difficult part of my research, because you have to keep in mind that this stay behind network was not discovered by accident. It was discovered because an Italian magistrate, so, that's a judge, he investigated a terrorist attack that had happened in 1972 in a small Italian village, northern Italy, in Peteano. That was an attack where, there was a car abandoned in that village, and then there was a phone call to the police which said, we don't know what car this is, come over, check it out. And then the Italian police went there and opened, the door of the car, and the car exploded, and 3 police officers were killed. And right after that, you had a phone call which said, "We are the Red Brigades," which was an Italian terrorist group of the extreme left, and we are responsible for this terrorist attack. We did it. And then you had a police officer, an expert in explosives, who in the investigation said, "I looked at the explosive, and the explosive very clearly is the one used by the Red Brigades." Okay, so this story stood for a long time. And then suddenly an Italian judge, Felice Casson, looked at the attack again, and he found that it was all wrong, that it was all false, that it was all manipulated, that there was a sea of lies. And he found out that, in fact, this terrorist attack had been carried out not by the extreme left, but by the extreme right. And he found out that Vincenzo Vinciguerra was the terrorist who had carried out this attack. So he got hand of the man. He was an extreme right-wing member of Ordine Nuovo, which is some neo-fascist group in Italy. And Vinciguerra said, "Yes, I carried out this terrorist attack. That's true indeed. But, I'm being protected. I'm being protected by a network of secret services, and furthermore, there's a secret network all over Europe coordinated by NATO." So he said that, remember, that was 1980s, and many people in Italy thought, this man is just mad. Okay, there's no secret NATO army and nothing of the kind, and it's impossible and whatever. But then this Italian judge was really, determined to find out the truth, and he pressured Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti to give him access to the Italian Military Secret Services archive. And strangely enough, and I can't explain that really, I must admit, strangely enough, he got access to the archives of the Italian Military Secret Service. I mean, imagine that. If I, as a historian, got access to the archives of the CIA or the MI6 or the Mossad or the Italian Secret Service, I mean, obviously we would find interesting things as well. But, this Italian judge then gets access to the archives. And only there, he finds the documents which state very clearly that Operation Gladio was designed to fight 2 enemies. First, a Soviet invasion. That never happened. And secondly, a domestic enemy. And the idea to fight this domestic enemy was that you carry out a terrorist attack. Usually terrorist attacks shock everybody, and then everybody's fearful. Second, what you do is you blame your enemy. So you say the communists during the Cold War, or today you would say the Muslims. And then they're totally discredited, even if they didn't do the terrorist attack. That is called false flag strategy of tension. And this Italian judge, Felice Casson, found out that the strategy of tension was actually used to shock Italy into, a very strong fear of communist terrorism. So it was fabricated. And then today we try to put together the pieces, and NATO doesn't want to comment, and the CIA doesn't want to comment, and the MI6 doesn't want to comment, and it's a bit tricky. But what we know today is that these terrorist attacks were carried out, and many of them were false flag strategy of tension. So, we were being lied to.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Tony Farrell, and for those that don't know me, I used to be the Principal Intelligence Analyst at South Yorkshire Police, and in 2010, July, I was chucked out of that organisation for speaking truth to the Chief Constable and my management regarding the terror threat, and in particular the event of the London bombings, which I was unable to accept by way of a government narrative that was ludicrous. But I'm not here to talk about that specifically. I'm here because I've been involved over the last 6 months with a particularly interesting case and a lady that is called Seven.
My name is Seven. I am what's classified as a targeted individual, and I have been for the last 14 years. I'm actually now a survivor, although I'm still targeted. I won the largest case on public record for targeting, and I fought my case through the UK courts. And it is a case of extreme magnitude. There's many people who are researching things like Pizzagate, Pedogate, or, false flag operations. Many of the other things that we are witnessing unfold before our eyes. I should say crimes we are seeing unfold before our eyes. And in one way or another, it's connected to my case because of the crime ring involved, which is now known as Sevengate.
I met Seven on the 1st of May, 2012, outside a protest at the Independent Police Complaints Commission. And from that point onwards, I increasingly became familiar with her story. And it's an incredible story. It's a story of state cover-up, of monstrous proportions. It's a story that involves gang stalking, what I would class as domestic terror, and a monstrous cover-up in the judiciary and the police service. And it is really something that I believe has the potential to add insight into the events regarding the London bombings and the terror fear-mongering tactics that were perpetrated throughout July 2005 and all the subsequent cover-up of those monstrous atrocities. My research now on this has now come to an end, and I have produced, along with Seven, a joint report. I have taken a look at what was before the courts. I have taken a look as to what's happened since. I have stood back and examined the court process and everything that's happened in and around this case. And in this analysis, I am behaving as if I was the principal intelligence analyst and preparing information that I would be wanting to present to my chief constable. I am making strong inferences. I'm making inferences against named individuals and named organisations. Sadly, I'm making inferences about corrupt practice in organisations that have the responsibility for protecting us and for giving us justice. One of the reasons why I'm going public is because, I'm afraid to say, that the information that's available to me offers up compelling evidence that there is corruption within the police service, particularly in the Metropolitan Police, and widespread corruption in the judiciary. And the inferences I'm making will expose those elements. The appendices contain material that was in the courtroom, witness statements, compelling evidence, evidence that Judge Pumphrey in 2006 that can be verified by the audio tapes is on record as saying that Miss Seven, as a litigant in person, produces the best evidence that he has ever seen produced by a litigant in person. On a level of truth, he cannot doubt the truthfulness and the integrity of Miss Seven as she presented herself in a 3-day hearing. Now, unfortunately, that then subsequently did not bear any resemblance to the subsequent court order and judgment that came out that had the hallmarks of the defence barrister all over it. This is clear indication of massive corruption, and this is about what we're exposing. My probability assessment is that at least 5 people in this case could well have been murdered as opposed to met their deaths some other way. And that I'm making very strong inferences in that case. Murdered in order to cover up and keep quiet and silence the evidence that is within. Now, even before I knew Seven and was familiar with any of her case, I knew that 7-7 was an inside job. Having met Seven and familiarising myself with the case, I am persuaded that her case gives fresh insight and a new dimension to what really may well have happened on the London bombings. And, for instance, on the 22nd of July 2005, the assassination of Jean-Charles de Menezes. A feature of this case, and it does have many unusual features, is the extent of the gang stalking that Miss Seven has endured over a prolonged period of time. Since meeting with Seven and since working with Seven on this report, I too have actually been first-hand witness to some, only a fraction, but to some of the kind of experiences that Seven has endured. And believe you me, I am astounded and staggered by how organised and how sick and putrid the whole thing is. Since being seconded and helping Seven on her case and working on this case, I have witnessed agents of the state behave in an utterly corrupt and inappropriate manner. I am persuaded, having spent 6 months on this case, that Miss Seven and her case needs to be heard. It needs to be heard by the public. It's not a case that we can trust just to hand over to the police. Because I'm afraid to say, we have evidence here that on 65 occasions, Miss Seven has gone to the police for help. And this spans nearly a period of 10 years. And on 65 occasions, I can point towards a total abject failure by the police service to protect a victim of monstrous criminality. I believe that this is a supremely important case. Had it not been, I wouldn't have actually invested the time and the effort and the pain and the fear to actually engage myself and embrace this case in its entirety. There is abundant evidence that's been through the courts that can support all the inferences and the allegations that we're making. One of the things over and above the reports will be a 25-minute video that we've made. This video contains what I believe is real dynamite. The dynamite being audio tapes of a court hearing, a crucial court hearing that occurred in 2006 in front of Judge Pumphrey. Pumphrey is now dead, but these tapes were released by Judge Warren. These tapes show that this case that Miss Seven had against Gossage and 9 others was, in no uncertain terms, heading towards a criminal trial, and that Miss Seven was eligible to apply for default, summary default, because of the lack of defence by certain defendants. There was no way this case was going to get struck out. But what subsequently transpired was so polarised from the utterances by Judge Pumphrey in the hearing that it smacks of corruption and cover-up. Pumphrey died, but not before he was silent, not before he was promoted, not before he was knighted. Ultimately, there was an attempt by Lord Justice Lawrence Collins, a solicitor, that made rapid strides in promotion to close it down. The final thing, over and above the witness statements and the affidavits that are available, will be My analysis that was before the Employment Tribunal in the Royal Court of Justice, before Lady Dame Janet Smith, about the London bombings. And even before I knew Seven, why I, as the Principal Intelligence in South Yorkshire Police, could not believe the official narrative of 7/7 and the full, unadulterated analysis that was available but was closed down by our corrupt British system is available as an extra appendices to supplement the whole thing. This is an incredible case. It's complex. We can't put it across in 20 minutes, but for those with a willingness to actually understand all this, the material is there, the evidence is compelling. Thank you very much.
I'm a creative inventor and sort of conceptual designer. My background is in media and entertainment, film, television, music, primarily film and TV, but also in the music industry as well. In a nutshell, I was targeted for my intellectual property. It began that way and morphed into an absolute nightmare, in short. And I developed a multimedia platform, and
that was stolen off you?
It was stolen by Helen Mary Alexander and a number of people within the entertainment industry. And simultaneously, it morphed into a sort of targeting operation, if you like, threats, etc., to prevent me from A, being paid, and B, taking any form of legal action to get any redress.
But you did take legal action. So you took this case on, didn't you, single-handedly?
Yes, I did. I sued. It was basically, I took emergency proceedings in 2004 because running up to me taking up proceedings, I was being literally terrorized for a very long time. I created a multimedia platform, and this platform was converted into literally tons and tons of shows, and these shows were sold to all the different networks in the UK and around the world. So we're talking not just about one production, but multitudes of productions.
And in that instance, in Strictly, BBC were the beneficiaries ultimately, but it also went around the globe, didn't it?
Yes,
in many nations.
it was sold all over.
This was worldwide success.
Absolutely.
And it's still going.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of the popularity of the shows and the fact that the shows were very successful, they didn't want me to be identified as the person who was behind it. And to prevent me doing anything about the fact that they were deals being done for large amounts of money, my whole life basically got taken over, if you like, in a very horrific way. Phones were tapped, computers were hacked. I was, people were turning up at my house.
So massive intimidation.
Yes,
while
absolutely.
you took them through the court process.
Yes, I started being stalked everywhere. I started being threatened. I saw that my house was under surveillance 24 hours. There was surveillance vans outside my house. There were men that were tailing me down the street, making slit your throat signs. Some people might not be familiar with the term gang stalking or targeted individual. I'm what's called a targeted individual. As I said, I was targeted for my intellectual property. And in the course of how gang stalking takes place, you are selected and put on a program, and basically you experience harassment, death threats on a regular basis, break-ins. I've had my property broken into, I've had my property burgled.
And you haven't had any particular help from the public authorities, have you?
Basically, when you have a case like this, there is a conspiracy of silence around it. And all the departments that are involved in protecting people are either paid to keep quiet or they're made to keep the whole thing quiet. So it doesn't matter where you go officially to get help, you'll find that every door will be slammed in your face. The Bar Council offices were actually burgled. They contacted me and told me that the evidence was burgled from their, there was a burglary in their offices, and the evidence that I had produced about Nicholson was stolen from their offices. So that's typical of the kind of thing that goes on. This is a criminal cartel. They operate from within mainstream media and the entertainment industry. And they wield a great deal of power because they are notorious. They steal people's intellectual property. I'm by no means the only case of this. I've had people writing to me since my case has gone up and become sort of more known. I get other victims that come to me and talk to me about what's going on in the industry. Humphrey, when he realised what was the skullduggery going on, he made it very, very clear that he was going to convict people for perjury and contempt of court and, you know, all sorts of other things. Humphrey made it very clear that the case couldn't be struck out because the barrister was saying, you've got to get rid of this case. My client's reputations will be ruined if this comes out. You've got to get rid of it. And he said, under no uncertain terms, there's absolutely no way that that's going to happen.
Mr. Nicholson, you can try if you like, but there won't be an awful lot of patience. So I think, to be quite frank with you, I mean, the answer whether the failure was intentional must be resolved in favour of Miss Saville. This case is about I'd have thought a year away from trial. This case is about a year away from trial. Would be my immediate reaction.
If you allow this case now to proceed, it will result in, particularly if we're heading more towards trial and summary judgment from matters that your Lordship has already said, it will result in hundreds of thousands of pounds of irrecoverable expense. It will result in a very long trial if these 3 days are anything to be indicative of. It will result in a large number of very respectable witnesses being brought to give live evidence, who will be cross-examined by Miss Seven, and we have seen in extent what Miss Seven thinks of these witnesses as individuals, and the allegations which she has prepared to bring.
You must understand, I mean, this is all very well, but if the action has a foundation which should not be struck out, all that becomes irrelevant, because it is an action with certain unhappy consequences for the participants. But there it is. It is not strikable. The fact that you have got a whole lot of people who don't want to lose is irrelevant.
There are a number of deaths associated with this case. As I said, there's a massive cover-up around it. State kind of cover-up. Humphrey was found dead in 2007 in his apartment.
Now, my court case was scheduled to happen in July of 2005. And all of a sudden, I saw the possibility of the trains being blown up at that same time. So I was literally panicking. So what I did was I gathered all my evidence, and I have so much of it. And I went to the Magistrates' Court, which is in an area called Marylebone in London. And I went and I asked to see a judge, and I was introduced to a court clerk called Charles Rees. I was in tears. I went with my evidence and I showed him exactly what was going on. I said, there is a national security issue. Human lives are in danger. There is a cartel, a criminal cartel, and they're committing crimes, they're perpetrating crimes. I said, I want to put an injunction against them. I showed him that I had taken proceedings against them. I showed him this, that my case had been lodged within the High Court and it was scheduled. I told him all the people involved. I showed him evidence that they were committing these crimes in real time and that there was a very real threat to actually for them to blow up the trains. Now, this man was winded, and I'd be absolutely frank with you. He believed everything I said. He went white like a sheet because evidence doesn't lie. I showed him hard evidence. I showed him all of the stuff that was going on, that my work had been stolen, and there was a mass racketeering, international racketeering operation underway, and this court case was about to explode everything into the public. There were obviously fixers, government figures, they had police officers, because when I was going to Paddington police station, we were being told that the CID would come, and they never came. And I mean, there's over 65 police reports. We've got the crime files, and you'll see that they had police officers that were rubbing out evidence. They were covering up evidence. Every crime file that was logged in of burglaries and the things that were being taken, the death threats, all of it was being scrubbed out. They had people, and this Sergeant Stallard, he was involved in this. And a key thing is that Paddington Green Police Station is the main terror branch for the UK. And this is where this man was operating. So he knew what was going on with these criminals. And so hence the reason why when I went to that police station to put injunctions for them to take action, they didn't. They wouldn't help me at all. So I told this Mr. Charles Rees all this, and he said, okay, these are your options. He said you could either take action against the police to make them take action against the criminal cartel, or I could take action against the courts to make the courts take action against the police to stop the cartel. Now, this was about the 10th of June, 2005. And I said to him, I've got a court case which is massive in July of 2005. There's no way I'm going to mount proceedings against the police and the courts in that time as well. I just can't do it. I said, you've got to give me an injunction for public safety. He said, well, those are the only ways that I would be able to physically, restrain these people at this stage until I went into court and they saw my evidence and all the rest of it. So I was winded. I was floored. I mean, can you imagine knowing that people are going to be murdered potentially on the trains? You know this. You're a nobody. In the scheme of things, you're just an ant, and you have limited resources. This is a massive machine. These are psychopaths. These are Satanists. These are a cult with, backup and a network, and you're just one person. And on the other hand, you have on your shoulders the potential that people are going to be killed. There is no words to really describe the enormity of that was placed on my shoulders. And basically, there was nothing I could do. The only thing that I could do was to stay alive. And so my intuition said, go into hiding. Go into hiding now. So after leaving there, I went into hiding, and I stayed within hiding for 3 months. So actually the bombings took place while I was in hiding. Here, the judge refers to that.
Miss Seven's all work which she's done is on the very high end of the degree of competence, so far as the preparation of written documents are concerned, that I have ever seen from a litigant in person. I think that's probably right. I mean, these are far and away the best prepared documents which I think I have ever seen from a litigant in person. At a particular level of truth, I cannot doubt what Miss Seven says. I cannot doubt that she spent, on the material available to me, that she spent 3 months, in her house for the reasons stated in the letter. I don't really want to go into it any further than that.
He said, I cannot doubt what Miss Seven says has happened to her, and that she had to remain in a house. First he said for 3 days, then he said, no, sorry, for 3 months, for the reasons that she said had happened to her. And then he says, I don't want to go more into it than that. He doesn't want to say that he knows that they killed these people and that they were behind the London bombings. But what he's saying here, this is profound. This judge is putting his life on the line and saying that a particular level of truth, he cannot doubt what I have said has happened to me, because it's facts. That judge read every single paper. He knew my case inside out, and it's a massive case. It really is. There's evidence against every single defendant and their corporations, you know. And I had to, you know, you don't make allegations like I'm making unless you can substantiate them.